guys! So for some reason the intro video I filmed a few days ago apparently turned itself right side up, and yeah, that doesn't work in terms of importing. So here is a bit of a makeup intro video. I'm Elise. I read a lot, which I feel like you should know because this is the video we're filming. I like to talk about books. I also like to complain about books. I'm very good at complaining about things. Please do feel free to comment. This video that we're filming today is going to be all of the books I read in May. I have divorced parents, so this is obviously a different bookshelf than you're going to see in my next video. We might be hopping around a bit. I've read a lot of ARCs this month, so I don't really have pictures for most of the books I've read. The first book that I read recently was Eat the Sky, Drink the Ocean, and this is a story compilation which I picked up for this. It's a really pretty cover. I couldn't help it. And I also really like story collections, so it wasn't totally just the cover. It was mostly the cover. A lot of these stories didn't really read like short stories. Rather, they all read like story prompts that didn't really get finished. All of these were just 10 pages too short and obviously meant to be the setup for some new novel that is not getting written. I think I rated it 3 stars because while I did enjoy it a lot, it wasn't enough. I wanted more. According to Goodreads, and this is obviously not true, the next thing I read was the Aeneid. Now, I have not actually finished the Aeneid. I am not even in AP Latin yet. That comes next year. But I felt really bitter, and it was 1 a.m., so I rated the Aeneid 1 star, and I wrote a rant review about it, and I basically called it out for insta-love, which is completely fair. Next to last one I read was Girls Made of Snow and Glass by Melissa Bashardoust, and I was so happy to get an ARC of this. I got an ARC of this from my local bookstore, which is where I get most of my ARCs. It had a cover that didn't even have the title on it. It just had a quote which was, "You want this book. You need this book." Girls Made of Snow and Glass is a Snow White retelling. I found Mina, the evil queen's perspective, so interesting to read. I loved her. From around 50 pages into the book, I was like, Mina is going to be a new favorite character of mine. Single fantasy standalones just never go deep enough for me. And I feel like that is one advantage of series, that even if they are super long and just there are unnecessary sequels, they get to go deeper. And I didn't feel like Girls Made of Snow and Glass just went deep enough. I rated it 4 stars because I did really enjoy it, and I like the concept, and I really do like fairy tale retellings, and Mina's character was amazing. This also is an LGBT book. Lynette is in a romance with another girl. That is in there for those of you who want to know. The next book I read was Sovereign, which is the second book of Dreadnought by April Daniels. And this just was an unnecessary sequel. I appreciated parts about it. I really, really liked the ending of the second book. But I was also honestly kind of glad it ended. I rushed through the first book. I found it really compelling. I really liked Danny. This sequel was not nearly as good. I do think that one thing which really bothered me about both books was that there is a villain who is a TERF, so a trans-exclusionary radical feminist. I did not like the way she was written. I found her extremely comical, and I feel like making a comic book villain out of such a real threat to kids' lives, it just bothered me. I didn't like it. I found Grey Witch just grated on my nerves in the second book. I hated her, and not in a good way. I just wanted her off the page. The next book I read was actually a reread. It was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. New introduction to Things About Me. This is my favorite book. Actually, this is my favorite. I don't know which one is my favorite book. They're both amazing. I'm someone who really loves strong developed characters. The plot's really enjoyable. It's badass. It's fun. Yeah, I'll probably talk about this later and write a full video ranting about how much I love this book. But for now, just checked out the link to my extended review on Goodreads, which is really, really long. I'm sorry. The book I read earlier than that was Jane Unlimited by Kristen Cashore. She hasn't written a book in so many years, and now she's finally written one. And I can assure you it is just as amazing. It even blew away my expectations. Kristen Cashore is the writer of the Graceling series, which is one of my favorite series of all time. Jane Unlimited a little bit reminded me of Bitter Blue, except possibly even better in its own way. I think a lot of people found Bitter Blue a little long, a little boring, and while I love Bitter Blue, I think it's one of my favorite books, I admit the pacing of that book was a little off. I think the pacing of all of Cashore's books up to now has been probably the only thing I don't solidly adore about her books, but I did not have that issue with Jane Unlimited. I thought it was really well paced. I just rushed through it. It is a 500-page book, and I finished it really quickly. I'm not going to spoil anything about it, but it's a bit of a mystery. But it is a lot more than that. It gets a little sci-fi-ish. It gets a little paranormal. It's awesome. You get to follow 5 different paths that Jane's life could have taken. And they all unveil different parts of this creepy house she's at. This also, and nobody freaking warned me about this, which I am kind of happy about, honestly. Jane is bi and has a romance with a girl. And it was a really good romance. I really shipped them. I am someone who really likes genre fiction with LGBT protagonists, and this book did it right. This book even did, like, showing that the character was bisexual without having to have her sleep with multiple people, right? The next book I read, and I totally picked this up on a whim, was Defy the Stars by Claudia Gray. Now, I have not read anything by Claudia Gray before. I don't like romantic fantasy as a rule. I literally almost never enjoy romantic fantasy. And this book was an exception to that rule, as a robot as a main character, which is something I've never actually come across before in a book that I've read. I just found the 2 main characters, Noemi and Abel, really, really well developed, and the romance between them is not the main focus of the book, first of all. We all know it takes a lot for me to ship things, and usually, by takes a lot, I mean, they better not even be holding hands until the second book. This ship, they did actually have romantic things happen between them in the first book, but it was so close to the end. Their relationship took such a long time to build up. You could clearly see there were like 300 pages in the middle where their relationship was just being built and improved upon, and I loved it. So, guys, I know I'm not a romantic fantasy person, but this was good enough that I made an exception. Read it. The next book I read was That Inevitable Victorian Thing by E.K. Johnston. And again, because we're just making this a trend now, this was a book I picked up in an ARC exclusively because it was my favorite author, only to discover that it had intense LGBT elements. If you don't mind being slightly spoiled, one of the main characters is intersex. I have never seen an intersex character in fantasy or sci-fi before. That Inevitable Victorian Thing follows a kind of Victorian sci-fi combination. There were scenes where they were at balls and there were women wearing hijabs, and I just loved it. It was like a really diverse version of the Victorian world. I found the first 35% just entirely boring. Nothing happens. It's just so freaking boring. And then at around 35%, it suddenly picked up, and I'm not really sure why that happened. I ended up really enjoying the latter half. I don't think it was one of the best books I've ever read, but I really like E.K. Johnston's writing. I loved the world. The next book that I read was Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, and this book took me so fucking long to finish. I got really engaged with the story only after about page 250. Which is an issue. I did actually enjoy the first 250 pages to some degree, but I didn't feel compelled to keep reading. It was really just pretty boring, and the writing was nice, but I think Laini Taylor has gotten caught up in the fact that everyone loves her writing style now, and she's just made it even more flowery. I loved Laini Taylor's writing in Daughter of Smoke and Bone. I actually just read Daughter of Smoke and Bone. I got the copies at the event for Strange the Dreamer's release, and I got all of them signed, including Strange the Dreamer. And I basically did that because I read the first half of Dosab on my phone, and I loved it so much that I just had to pick up the entire series. I rated all 3 books 5 stars. When I picked this up, it took me a while to be quite as engaged, and I think that's partially the pacing, but I think the writing has also gotten more flowery. And I'm sure that'll be good for a lot of people. It was not for me. There were points where the romantic writing, especially Laszlo's thoughts about his romantic interest, who I won't spoil, it was just bad. It was just, oh God. It got to the point where he like described her lips 40 times. And I was like, they're lips. Get on with it. Did like the romance a lot. I did like the characters a lot. And that ending, while a little bit predictable, I kind of saw it coming from about 30 pages off the end. I was still broken up about it. I still almost cried because it was that upsetting. But it was solid. I rated it 4 stars, but I feel like the next book is going to be incredible because I'm going to be engaged from the beginning rather than from 250 freaking pages in. The next book I picked up was Dear Martin by Nick Stone, and this is another arc that I got from my bookstore, but I actually have a copy. The ending of this book is just one of the best things I've ever read. Let's be hopeful about racism, but let's be hopeful about it in a way that really feels real rather than, ooh, racism is gonna end with a little love and luck. Really recommend picking it up when it comes out. Please do. I rated it 4.5 stars. It only didn't get a 5-star because it was frankly just too short to be a 5-star book. Nick Stone, literally 3 days after I read this, announced on her Twitter that there's going to be a new cover for it, and the new cover is stunning, and I feel like I'm gonna have to buy a copy because this cover is so ugly. Just the red doesn't work. It doesn't. But I did tweet Nick Stone, actually, and I was like, wow, now I love everything about this book rather than only 90% of it. And she tweeted me back, haha, and that was amazing. The next book I read was The Edge of the Abyss by Emily Skrutsky, and I love this duology. I love this duology. It's not that original. It's a little fanfiction-y. It's a little cliche, but it's so good. If pirates, lesbians, and sea monsters sounds at all interesting to you, you need to check this out. I also have this chapter sampler from The Edge of the Abyss from that one time that Emily Skrutsky just randomly showed up at my local bookstore that I keep getting arcs from without announcing she was going to be there so I could come meet her. But it is signed. I also read The Wolf Hour by Sarah Lewis Holmes. This was a really brief fairy tale retelling. It's very middle grade-ish, but it gets very meta about fiction, and I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I'd really recommend it to the typical YA reader. I don't know if it's necessarily worth spending money on, but I loved it. I shot through it. I definitely recommend it to anyone looking for middle grade books. The next book I read was Charm and Strange by Stephanie Kuhn, and I rated this 4 stars at the time, but I'm honestly getting less sure about that rating. You know, a lot of people say that this book is super powerful, and I think it is powerful, but I didn't freaking understand the ending. I literally had to look it up online, and granted, I was ridiculously tired at the time. I had basically gotten no sleep that entire week. I mean, the fact remains that I didn't get the ending. I feel like if you write a book this confusing, and then the ending still doesn't make sense, you need to think about that. You need to try and fix that. I don't know if I'd recommend this. I will be checking out other things by her, though. And I think this will work for a lot of people. A lot of people rated this 4.5 stars, etc., etc., etc. So try it out if it sounds interesting. There's only one other book that I read this month that I think bears mentioning. It was Girl Out of Water by Laura Silverman. This book got a lot of attention basically because this author was harassed by neo-Nazis for speaking up about anti-Semitism on Twitter. My heart goes out to her. I enjoyed this book. I found the first 70% boring. Despite the fact that I did enjoy the first 70%, I just wasn't that engaged in the story. I think I'd recommend this just because I found the end really good and I thought the main character was really interesting. And it had a cute romance, but it's not a big focus of the book. It's mostly about family and finding yourself. Maybe a summertime read if you can get your hands on an arc. Alright guys, that is it for my wrap-up video, which is not actually a wrap-up video because we still have multiple days left in May. Comment below. Mention your thoughts on any of these books because I obviously love talking books. And have a good month, you guys.